Spirited psychologist at the University of St. Andrews. In 1985-86, my family availed itself of that experience, had a wonderful experience while we were there that year, during which time we became aware of the Iona community, which is founded by the Church of Scotland, or is an outgrowth of the Church of Scotland, as will be explained, but today defines itself as an international ecumenical Christian movement working for justice and peace, the rebuilding of community, and the renewal of worship. And it's that latter aspect that we often experience in our own worship at Hope Church as we use Iona community music. The Iona community is based primarily in Glasgow, but also has a retreat center where people make pilgrimage on the Isle of Iona. And having known about that, and having known also that for us as kind of Scottish Presbyterians, a heritage, our religious roots were on Iona because this is the birthplace of Christianity in Scotland, as I suspect Didi will be, and Gordon will be, and others will be explaining. So we made pilgrimage there in the spring of 1986, and as a result of that Scottish experience, we've formed some good friends, particularly with people in St. Andrews, and have ended up making a nearly annual pilgrimage to St. Andrews, Scotland, every summer since for 3 or 4 weeks for a working holiday with some travel in Scotland on the front end. So I now know Scotland much better than I know Michigan. I've been to every corner of it, I think. And we've been to Iona about 30 times, most every one of those summers, including last spring, when I should tell you, the weather was glorious. It was sunny every day. The rain, it hardly rained at all. In fact, by the time we left and throughout the summer, there was near drought conditions in Scotland. And the Scottish farmers were praying for rain, and Hope Church helped to answer that, I gather. Along the way, we've been privileged to get to know John Bell and people connected with the Iona worship group, and also the leadership of the community, and to be able to give support to both the worship group and through some foundations to the renewal and the increased accessibility of the Abbey facilities, not knowing that our own friends here at Hope Church would have a chance to take advantage of that. Now, there's another person here who also has a lot of Scottish experience and has been much more venturesome than I am, because she's not just been there for her personal pleasure, but to give the experience of Scotland and of Iona to others, to adults, and especially to student groups that she's taken there, and that's Didi Johnston. Now, first of all, I want you to know her name is not Didi Johnson. That's a Scandinavian name. It's Johnston, which is a Scottish name. And I'm not going to steal any more of her time or thunder, so Didi, take us there.
Now am I green? Yeah. Woohoo! Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's so wonderful to see such a wonderful turnout, and I hope you are all sated on turkey and ready to travel to Scotland this morning. So just to add to a little bit of the history that David provided you, so St. Columba came from Ireland in 563 or thereabouts on a little tiny boat, and made it, which is actually really kind of close, so they make it sound like this grand adventure, but you can see Ireland from Iona on a clear day. But nevertheless, he made it in his little tiny boat with his group of disciples, and they came to establish a monastery on the Isle of Iona, and Scotland at that time was a pretty wild area. The Romans had decided,
away from under the speaker.
okay, I will. So he ventured to Scotland, and again, very wild time. The Romans had given up on Scotland. They built a wall and just said, keep those people on the other side because they're too wild and barbaric for us. So it was quite an adventurous thing to bring Christianity to the north, as it was, into Scotland. Then we fast forward into the 1930s. Glasgow, in particular, was experiencing a worldwide depression, as many places in the world were during that time, but particularly a lot of people unemployed, out of work. And a person called George MacLeod was a minister in the area in Glasgow, and organized a group of men primarily to go to Iona and to rebuild the 15th century abbey that was in ruins. And that was the origins of the Iona Christian community that we know today. So from his leadership, a community evolved, and they are what's called a dispersed monastic community. They do not live on the Isle of Iona, but rather they live all over the world, and they engage the world where they find it, in their localities. And that's a central theme to the Iona Christian community. So the community has about 300 members, give or take, and then there are also associate members and friends of the community that number into 2,000, 2,500 people, dispersed around the world, though primarily in the UK. And part of that reason is to be a part of that community, you need to meet regularly with your family group or your regional group that holds you accountable to the disciplines of the community. So the Iona community today is very much committed to peace and justice. They take positions, which you'll hear about a little bit in some of the presentation today, on the contemporary issues of peace and justice. If you are a full-fledged Iona community member, part of this community, you agree to engage all the time in your life in a ministry of peace and justice, which means you pick one thing and you go deep. You might be taking in asylum seekers, as was one of the members of the community that I've met with over the years. You might be working to do community gardens and food in deprived areas in cities. And so you live out your faith daily because you are held accountable, that you're not just giving money or occasionally engaging in this type of ministry, but this is what you do. Other things that they live by in terms of the rules are accountability for your time, for your environmental impact, and for your finances. And I find this incredibly challenging and inspirational, that you meet with your family group, you share your finances with each other and say, where am I spending my money? Because that really makes a difference. Where am I spending my time? Am I playing too much free cell when I could be doing something at the community kitchen down the block? So that accountability with each other, how you spend your money, how you spend your time, and your environmental impact. Are you flying too much internationally? Are you traveling too much for your own personal joy that's taking an impact on the environment? What are you doing? So they hold each other accountable. So there's the peace and justice, the accountability, engaging in daily prayer for the community and daily investment in your own local Christian community and your own local congregation. And also working for the Iona Christian community. So each member returns to the Isle of Iona at least once a year to contribute their time and leadership to the Christian ministry on the island. Okay? So that gives you just a little bit of context. What you're going to hear about today are different people's experiences, and I am going to turn things over to the Turlos to lead us off. Do you want to use a handheld mic?
Yeah, here.
Yes, I'm Larry Turlau, and I have over the years in my ministry and in my personal walk read about and studied and practiced some of the Celtic spirituality over the years. And so I was really interested in going to Iona and spending some time. And my time there really reignited my my interest and my desire for more experience of the Celtic spirituality and tradition. And so in this little time we have, I share three things that I see as being the essential parts of Celtic spirituality. And one first is that the universe, all matter, nature, and human beings are born out of the substance of God. We're not born out of nothing. We have God within us and all creation. So all created beings are sacred. Christ is the reawakening in humanity, what humanity has forgotten. Divine grace restores us and all life to the very essence of our being. In the early Christian centuries, Irenaeus and Pelagius were influential leaders and teachers. Second, life is to be lived in community, and you have sensed that already by what Dee Dee has shared. St. Bridget of Kildare, way back in the early hundreds of Christian history, points to the portals that connect the divine and the human, humanity and the earth, pre-Christian and Christian wisdom, and the equal relationship of female and male humanity. In other words, the interrelationship of all beings. Thus, mutual care, honor, and respect is the divine creative intent. And third, divine love is the source and the renewal of all life. Love moves to complete both nature and humanity. Oh. Back? Okay. Love moves to complete both nature and humanity, and to complete all of the diverse human, cultural, spiritual traditions, not to force them to try to compete with one another. Without love, life becomes an experience of separation and competition and domination. I see myself through my own experience great similarities here in the Celtic tradition to the Franciscan tradition, which I experienced a lot through Richard Rohr and his writings and his center's work, and also Native American spirituality. The Celtic tradition endured the challenge of the excommunication of Pelagius in the early hundreds, the conquest of Scotland, or the attempted conquest of Scotland by Rome, and then the arrival of the Reformation. Reformation was not all that kind to much of Celtic spirituality in those days either. But as Dee Dee has shared, George MacLeod renewed the interest in the Celtic tradition by rebuilding the abbey and establishing the Iona community. MacLeod was most often heard to respond to critical social, human, and environmental issues with this question: what are we going to do about it? The Celtic influence is lived out today in the Iona community through what they call the 9 common concern networks, a little bit of what Dee Dee has shared, but I quickly shared the environment, poverty and inequality, challenging racism, the Israel and Palestine concern, interfaith relations, faith and spirituality, peace, migration and refugees, and very strongly the LGBTQ plus issues and needs. This list should seem very familiar to us who live out our own spiritual pilgrimage as the Hope Church community. The Celtic impact on my own pilgrimage is illustrated in a Celtic prayer that I share, that I've adapted and use very regularly. Christ as a light, illumine and guide me. Christ as a shield, overshadow me. Christ above me and below me. Christ beside me on my left and my right. Christ within me and without me. Lowly and meek, yet all-powerful. Christ be in the heart of all to whom I relate. Christ be in the mind and the mouth of all who relate to me. Christ as a light, illumine and guide me.
All Right, we have Gordon for a couple minutes as he flits in and out of the room, so we're going to put him on next, and then David, there you are, will be up next. Gordon's going to talk to us a little bit about the worship experience at Iona. And he brought books and props. Maybe a costume back there? Is this all that you brought home in your backpack from Iona? They have a very dangerous bookstore on Iona.
Thanks for letting me pop in order here. Just want to share a couple things with you about worship with the Iona community and our experience there. I'm going to first read this note from Cindy Valdhier Young. She wasn't able to be here today, but just here's a little reflection on worship that she shared. How much time do I have? Oh, shoot. Okay. Okay, so you have to stop me. So wait, but Cindy's doesn't count against my time. Along with many at Hope Church, this is from Cindy, I very much appreciated the worship resources offered by Iona and the Wild Goose Group. When we actually got to worship with the Iona community on Sunday morning, after all of the adventure of getting to this remote island, I was eager to absorb and engage in worship in Iona Abbey. I really appreciated the induction loop system's clarity, which was great. I also noticed the careful worship leadership that Sunday morning, including Gordon's presiding at the communion table, which was a huge blessing and highlight for me. The Iona community engages in serious confession and absolution exchanges. The leader begins with a written statement of confession. Before God, with the people of God, I confess my brokenness to the ways I wound my life, the lives of others, and the life of the world. This is followed by a statement of absolution by the congregation, which then offers the same words of confession and the same words of absolution from the leader. It is a reciprocal and intentional act in the liturgy. It's one perspective she wanted to share on worship. All right, so now you got to start my 3 minutes, okay? Okay, so what I brought, this is all from my office. And you can see that these are music resources from Iona, and these are liturgy resources from Iona. You can see that they are not in pristine shape. They are used. The music of Iona has deeply influenced the worship life of Hope Church. We draw on worship resources, liturgical resources, a lot in the Advent and Lent seasons. I really was influenced by Hope Church, and Hope Church helped me to discover Iona when I arrived here in '99. That was starting to come into our worship, and it's been a wonderful blessing for me. And I'm going to say what I think the worship resources from Iona do. They weave together poetry with justice, which often doesn't happen, right? Justice can be kind of sharp and demanding, and poetry may be ethereal, but it really says how the artistic nature of the soul is connected to justice too. It connects music and words. Words matter in Iona. They're chosen carefully. Protestants like words. We use lots of words, but then it's woven together with music. And the music is a way of putting into our hearts and souls what the words are expressing too. It weaves together contemporary, it's very connected to what's happening in the world, and is very aware of being rooted in history, that here we are at Iona, this Christian community that's been there for thousands of years. And it also uses worship in a way that connects the local and the global. You feel very, your feet grounded, present there, what's happening in life, but also it always brings in global connections with the music, with justice concerns, with celebration of the diversity of God's reign, of God's kingdom in Christ. So that's what I wanted to share.
Okay, David Anderson is going to talk about Get Thee to a Nunnery. Anderson. I know. It's early in the morning. I haven't even had coffee.
So I need to hold this, right? Well, I need to confess that I am almost 100% Swedish. And one day I was in the visitor center, and a lady from Italy was at the information desk. And when I told her that I was Swedish. She said, don't tell anybody else on this island because of all the pillaging that the Vikings did much earlier on. Well, I'm going to talk about the nunnery on Iona. And I don't know how I chose this topic except the term from Hamlet, or the words from Hamlet, get thee to a nunnery, which Hamlet said to Ophelia. But actually going to the nunnery on Iona was a good thing. Around 1200, two brothers, a brother and a sister, made their way to Iona. They were the children of Somerled, who was the Lord of the Isles, and his son Reginald was the King of the Isles, and Reginald's sister Beatrice was also there, and she was the first prioress or abbess of the nunnery. It was known as the Black Church, the nunnery, because it was an Augustinian order, whereas the abbey was a Benedictine order. And it was called the Black Church because of the rochets that the sisters wore, the black habits that went all the way from their heads down to their hands and to their feet. It was dedicated to the Virgin Mary, but some sources say also to St. Oran, who was, I believe, St. Columba's uncle. And of course, that a lot of what I'm saying this morning, you can go and research and say, boy, where did that guy get his information? I don't know. The nunnery is in ruins. It was largely built from a pink type of granite, which came from the Tormore quarry on Mull. We took the ferry from Mull to Iona. It's very striking building material. And since the quarry was close to the water, it was relatively easily transported to Iona. Just north of the nunnery is St. Oran's Chapel. And believe it or not, that was the parish church until around 1828. This little building that's maybe 36 feet long by 16 feet. How did they support themselves, these sisters? Well, they owned what were called nunnery lands, not only on Iona, but on Mull. And so that was the source of their income. And then a number of churches in the Hebrides supported them. So they were able to make a go of this property, this nunnery, until the mid-1550s. Close to 1560. Many of the nuns were from Ireland. A number of them were of noble birth, but they also took in fallen women, illegitimate children. It was also a desirable place for people to be buried at some point after their lives, hopefully not alive, as there's a legend that one of the early monks was buried alive and somehow survived at least once. I wondered, how did they, pardon? So I wondered how did they manage their health concerns if somebody was sick. And so the I looked up some of the herbal remedies that they might have used. Headaches and aching joints were treated with sweet-smelling herbs such as rose, lavender, sage, and hay. And then if you had aching joints, you might get a mixture of henbane and hemlock. Coriander was used to reduce fever. And then stomach pains and sickness were treated with wormwood, mint, and balm. So next time you're not feeling well, go to a herbalist somewhere or an herbalist. I'm going to drop a couple other things that I wrote down here, but even as late as the 17th century and maybe even into the 19th century, you could see the tomb of Beatrice, the original prioress. I'm going to leave a couple pictures here. I don't know if they showed up in the stream. but I have a diagram of the nunnery, which I traced from a very faded illustration that I found on the internet. And also, there's a, well done, Dave, thank you, a drawing of the tombstone, thank you, of Anna McLean, who was one of the last prioresses or abbesses. And please look for the two small dogs, her mirror and her comb, and then there's some angels at the top of the tombstone, or the slab. Now, every day, yes, I know I'm running out of time. Every day, one of the things that the sisters would do was to read from the Rule of St. Augustine. And one of the things that they held to very dearly, I mentioned earlier the people who were living among these nuns, illegitimate children, fallen women. Speaking of brothers or sisters, let them not hold their heads high because they associate with people whom they did not dare to approach in the world, but let them rather lift up their hearts and not seek after what is vain or earthly. Two other things. Last year, a group of Scottish Catholic pilgrims made a pilgrimage all the way to Iona, from Oban to Mull to Iona, and they actually celebrated a Mass in the ruins of the nunnery. I'm sorry, how many times have you groaned watching me trying to keep to my time slot? Okay, but this is good. This is good at the end. This is a different view of Iona, okay? There's an interesting book which I'd like to read called The Rebirthing of God. Have you heard of this, Dee Dee? By a writer named John Philip Noel. Oh, yes, know him. Yeah, heard of him, okay. He describes the strange beauty of this place that is both ruinous and gorgeous. He says it's like a roofless cathedral, open to the sights, sounds, and smells of sky and nature. He also believes that this nunnery has often been bypassed because of our neglect of the feminine. It's just maybe why it was never fully restored, as the abbey was. Okay, so he imagines a prayer, that these sisters would have told us to be faithful to God, be faithful to family, to neighbor, to God's magnificent creation, be faithful to stay on the path of pilgrimage to the creche, to the place of new birth and renewed hope. Like Mary, whose faith must have been truly tested, we too are pregnant with Jesus Christ, waiting in labor this Advent season for the Messiah to be born anew in our lives. So God, send shepherds and shepherdesses to lead, feed, and protect us. Send a star to guide us along the path of life, light. Send wise men and women to bring gifts for this new life of faith, hope, and love. Amen.
Okay. You see some connective themes happening here between Celtic spirituality that Larry talked about, pilgrimage, and next Kevin is going to talk to us about a weekly tradition on the Isle of Iona, which is a spiritual pilgrimage.
Thanks, Dee Dee. I think I get to talk about the most fun topic because this is why I went to Iona, to see the sights and go on this pilgrimage. I do have a couple pictures that I'm going to speak to along the way so you kind of see the different stopping points that we visited during our pilgrimage. But let me just read a couple things to get started. The Iona community has for many years run a weekly pilgrimage around the island, stopping at places of significance, be they historical, religious, or simply thought-provoking. They offer two variations to the pilgrimage on the Tuesday that we were there. One is an on-road pilgrimage, which is the shorter of the two. It's about a 2-hour walk along the roads near the abbey and the village to see the sites that are close by. And then there's an off-road pilgrimage, which is approximately about a 7-mile walk through the countryside and tours the whole island, stopping at other significant places that you can only really get to by foot and traversing the countryside. It was the off-road pilgrimage that I chose to go on, and Gordon was on that one as well. But I have to highlight that before I talk about this walk, it's just a pilgrimage in itself to get to the island. And I love how you get there. And I want to review these steps because I think it's fascinating. So leaving from Holland, Michigan, we all piled in our cars, the church van, and you need to drive to Chicago, where we took a flight out of O'Hare International Airport, a 7-hour flight overnight, 5 time zones ahead into Edinburgh. And then from Edinburgh, you hop on a train. And I can't remember the train ride. Is that 2, 3, 4 hours? 4 hours across Scotland to the west side of Scotland. And I think there's a switch in Glasgow. You pick up a different train to the city of Oban, which is a coastal town on the west side of Chicago, or west side of Scotland. From Oban, you hop on a ferry. It's about a 50-minute ferry ride across the water to the island of Mull. David mentioned the island of Mull. And this is where it really gets interesting, because on the island of Mull, you hop on a bus. It's one of these double-decker buses. And it's a 2-hour bus ride across Mull. But what caught me off guard is it's a single-lane road. And cars and traffic come the other way. And so you're constantly negotiating who gets to pull over and let the other vehicle pass. So it's pretty slow going. Once you get to the other side of Mull, you get on another ferry, which is about a 15 or 20-minute ferry ride. It's kind of like going to Mackinac Island to the island of Iona. And it was there that the staff from the Iona community met us at the jetty. Really nice welcome. They had a van there we could throw our bags on, and then they took our bags up to the Abbey while we walked up the hill to the Abbey. So I just think that's fascinating. Just getting to the island itself is an all-day excursion or pilgrimage, right? But more about the off-road pilgrimage that I took place on that Tuesday on the island. Can you back up? Right there. So this is St. Martin's Cross. I'm sure you've seen pictures of this that Dee Dee has shown, or other people throughout our different talks. This is where the pilgrimage starts, at the base of this cross. And what's fascinating about this is that thing has been there for 1,200 years. I just thought that was amazing. And you can go up and touch it, put your hand on it, and just think about how many people that cross has impacted. So we start our walk from there, and we eventually make our way to the St. Columba's Bay, which this is a picture of. And this is where they say Columba himself landed that small boat Dee Dee talked about at the island, okay? And what's really special about this spot, it's beautiful, but on the pilgrimage, they have a tradition where you pick up 2 stones. The first stone you pick up and you cast into the sea, and it's supposed to symbolize, leaving something heavy behind. And then you turn around and you pick up that second stone and walk away, symbolizing you're bringing something new forward into your life. And that's really meaningful, I thought. And I think other people thought so too. But the next slide, if you advance, that's just a picture of St. Columba's Bay as we're approaching it over this hill. You're up high and you're coming down into the kind of the valley there. And you can see the rocky beach, and of course there's all kinds of sheep in your way. And I'll pause here a moment because the day we went on our pilgrimage, the weather was terrible. It's like I almost didn't go. I mean, it was raining sideways. It was coming down so hard. But we trudged through, and I remember coming over this knoll to see St. Columba's Bay, and all these sheep lined up were in our path facing us. Like, they wouldn't let us through because they had their butts to the wind, basically, for protection. And there we were, staring down the sheep. But they did part as we walked through, and what was really, really nice about it is when we got down to the beach, the sun did come out, and things dried up, and we spent a lot of time here, and this is where we ate our lunch. It's kind of the halfway point. But just fantastic views. Next slide. After St. Columba's Bay, you progress up more inland and up into the higher ground, cross country, over some marshes and boggy area as well. And we stopped for a little while at this place called Hermit's Cell, I think it's called. And you can see there are these circular rocks that are what they think is the foundation of what used to be a hut or a dwelling of some kind. I don't know how long ago. They aren't sure, but maybe it was inhabited by a monk or someone at some time. And what they have us do is sit on those rocks in a circle in silence for a while and just kind of meditate with our thoughts. And then after a while, our guide will start to sing a song, and we'll all kind of participate in the song. And darn it, the song they started to sing was Be Still and Know. Isn't that good? And for those of you who are familiar with our Children in Worship program, that's the song that we teach our kids. So that hit me real hard. Next slide. And then the pilgrimage finally ends at St. Oran's Chapel, which is right next to the Abbey, which I understand is the oldest structure on the island. I don't know how far back it dates, but it's just a real nice place to finish your tour of the pilgrimage. And they give a little history about the cemetery there and some of the names of the people who are buried there and the royalty and why people want to be buried there. And then the next slide, inside this is the altar, and there's opportunity to light a candle in memory of someone. So that's our pilgrimage.
All right, our next group is going to talk about community and what that meant for our stay at Iona. So that's Carrie. Carrie, come first. Oh, you're going to talk about nature and soul. So go ahead, Carrie. We'll pull you up next, and then the next group is community. We are going to have to be mindful of time, so we make sure that everyone has a chance to talk. So I limited people to 700 words and told them to count them. It's difficult when it's such a wonderful experience you want to share.
So mine will be short because I think if it's okay, we'll go look at the painting. We'll stand up and I'll go out. Is that okay?
Can we do that right at the end?
Yes, we can.
A few minutes of transportation.
So a thing that popped out at me while I was there was one sentence, and it was, "The soul is like a wild animal." And I heard that sentence in worship, and I thought, oh, am I really hearing this right? It just struck me as such an odd thing to say about the soul, and set up all these sort of tensions about that. But I wanted to explain a little bit further what I think was meant by that. The soul is like a wild animal, tough, resilient, savvy, self-sufficient, and yet exceedingly shy. If we want to see a wild animal, the last thing we should do is to go crashing through the woods, shouting for the creature to come out. But if we are willing to walk quietly into the woods and sit silently for an hour or two at the base of a tree, the creature we are waiting for may well emerge, and out of the corner of our eye, we will catch a glimpse of the precious wildness we seek. And that's by Parker Palmer, which I know many people read and follow him. And I think that really did get to the heart of this thought that we as modern people miss often, where we're seeking, and we're always propelling forward in this way that we think we can grasp this wildness that we're given naturally by God, and that quietness, reflection. And when you're on Iona, you get a lot of time for that. And even in worship, that was the thing that I noted a lot, was these spaces. And the leaders there understood those spaces and allowed the Spirit to enter. And this was just marvelous. So much so that by the time I got back, I missed having worship twice a day. I missed it. It was like this element that, oh, if I could just go and be silent in that amazing place. So I did a little bit of research further, and I wanted to just say, for the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to the vision of soul and of spirit, of joints and of marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. That's from Hebrews 4:12. While the soul and the spirit may be distinguished, they are closely bound up, rather like joints and marrow. I found it helpful to think of soul and spirit as your inner life viewed from two sides. Your soul speaks of your inner life in relationship to your own experience, your mind, heart, will, and imagination. It also includes your thoughts, desires, passions, and dreams. But your spirit speaks of the same inner life in relation to God, your faith, hope, love, and character. From Genesis 2:7, God did not make a body and put a soul into it like a letter into an envelope of dust. Rather, he formed man's body from the dust, then by breathing divine breath into it, he made the body of dust live. The dust did not embody a soul, but it became a soul, a whole creature. So then I brought artwork in to share, and I made a painting that's a series of places that we walked on Iona. But thank you.
We will take a moment as a group to walk out and see Carrie's artwork and painting that is hanging in the church at the end of our session today. Now we're going to hear about community and our life on the island.
I changed topics, of course, and I wanted to talk about the music of Iona community. If you look in the red hymnal, you'll find 21 songs by John Bell. And if you look in the purple hymnal, you'll find 18 songs. So you can kind of see what kind of music we think is precious. One of the things that I was going to share with you was an echo psalm that we were encouraged to make. And echo means the ecosystem, all living things and how they affect us and others, and how we are affected by the environment and need to be affected by the environment. One of the fellow people that have been to Iona, in one of the books that's back there called Reflections, says, people come to Iona looking for peace and quiet and leave, go away, seeking peace and justice. And that's what it's all about. I want to end by sharing one of the songs that John Bell wrote called If the War Goes On, because I think it's really important today. If the war goes on and the children die of hunger, and the old men weep, for the young men are no more, and the women learn to dance without a partner, who will keep the score? If the war goes on and the truth is taken hostage, and new horrors lead to the need to euphemize, when the calls for peace are declared unpatriotic, who'll expose the lies? If the war goes on and the daily bread is terror, and the voiceless poor take the road as refugees, when a nation's pride destines millions to be homeless, who will heed their pleas? If the war goes on and the rich increase their fortunes, and the arms sails soar as new weapons are displayed, when a fertile field turns to no man's land tomorrow, who will approve such trade? If the war goes on, will we close the doors to heaven? If the war goes on, will we breach the gates of hell? If the war goes on, will we ever be forgiven? If the war goes on and on and on.
Thank you, Karen. And now we have Anne talking about community.
Yeah. One of the unexpected joys for me in traveling to Iona was living in community. When I first got there, I thought, oh, this is like summer camp, and I didn't like summer camp, but it ended up being an unexpectedly good thing. I'd like to briefly talk about two aspects, work and eating. All our meals were communal, served in the refectory, where all guests and residents eat together. Everyone sits at long tables, and the head of the table serves others at the table. The food is thoughtfully chosen to care for creation and be delicious. Most meals were vegetarian. For instance, every morning porridge and whole grain homemade toast is offered. The first morning I noticed my table mate adding fruit to her porridge. "Where did you get that?" I asked. Instead of pointing to the obvious bowl of fruit on the serving table, she jumped up and got me a perfect pear. By the end of the week, we were all in servant mode, and really no one had to be designated the table head. Every meal began with a simple yet meaningful grace. Here's an example. "Thanks be to God for the food on this table. Bless those who grew it, caught it, transported it. Bless those who prepared it, sold it, cooked it. And thanks be to God that we can eat it." Every day after morning worship, we spent 20 to 30 minutes on our work details. These were to care for the Abbey and each other. My job was to clean toilets. It sounds worse than it was. Team Sparkle, as Francois, Dee Dee, and myself called ourselves, was in charge of 3 bathrooms. It was not onerous, and we actually had fun helping each other make those bathrooms shine.
Thank you, Anne. And now Marilee talking about other aspects of our community experience.
Well, as you can have already heard, community was a really big part of our whole experience. And the community of Iona was founded on this basis that community was important. And I want to read, whoops, I didn't bring the little booklet, just a quote from the booklet that was describing Iona. It says, "We believe," well, here it is. "We believe in the transformational power of community to change lives and the world. Only in community can justice and love be done." Our own group became a community right away as soon as we got to Edinburgh. And Karen confessed later that she was a little afraid she wouldn't fit in because she was a newbie to Hope Church and maybe she wouldn't be included. Well, that worry evaporated right away because we just all made an intentional effort to get to know each other and to hear our life stories, and we became a community right away. So by the time we got to Iona, we were already a little community, but we were just 16 people. And we got to Iona, and there was a group of, I think, 44 guests that week, plus the staff and the volunteers that were there. Everyone there, the guests, the volunteers, the staff, were like an important spoke in the wheel of the community. So when we got there, we mixed and mingled with everybody else. And there were people from Scotland and England, of course, but there were people from Italy, from Switzerland, a real crazy guy from Australia who started out seeing a pop-up ad during COVID on his computer about, and got a scholarship to seminary in Atlanta, and that led to a scholarship to go to Oxford. And so while he was in the neighborhood, he came to Iona. That's just kind of interesting people that we ran into. A personal example for how the community touched me was at our very first meal in the evening, they asked for volunteers to serve communion at Sunday worship the next morning. And so I raised my hand, and I wasn't the only one from my group. And that was a real highlight, to serve communion in this beautiful old abbey. It was a very special thing. Later in the week, I tested positive for COVID. And so while I was confined to my room, some of the Hope Church elves delivered scones to me from David Meyer's favorite little place. And what really touched me the most was my work partner, Sally, sent me cough drops. And I thought this was community in action.
Thank you, Marilee. Ben Sickink was also part of our travel group on this pilgrimage and is unable to be with us to share with us this morning. We ask that you keep Mary in your prayers. They are at the hospital and undergoing some tests for Mary. So please keep him in your prayers. I'd like to now turn things over to Milt to talk about some of the social justice work of the Iona Christian community.
Thank you, Dee Dee. Since we're running short of time, I'm not going to freewheel it. I'm just going to stick to my 700-word script, so we're out of here on time. So, the Iona community is many things to many people, but one thing that stands out is their commitment to social justice. It's at the top of their mission statement. An example of that is their advocacy of Palestinian rights. I put out copies of their of Iona's position statement on Israel and Palestine. It was recently updated, 2023. I would urge you to take it home and read it. But I do want to quote the first sentence or two from it. It says, "The statement is a response to the extreme and accelerating urgency of the existential threat to Palestinians." And I'll skip down to the next paragraph. 2023 is the 75th anniversary of the Nakba, the catastrophe as the Palestinians look at it, when the state of Israel was established in 1948. It says here 750,000 Palestinians were dispossessed and displaced. Many became refugees. Thousands were killed, and some 500 villages razed. This process of ethnic cleansing has continued ever since. Well, what's so ironic from a personal standpoint is that Marilee and I had planned to visit our son Greg in Krakow and his family at the end of our Iona trip, but we had to come back to host a Holocaust survivor, Tova Friedman, who was giving a talk at Hope College. And the irony is that the topic of her talk was going to be peace and justice and reconciliation. So then what happens? Hamas attacks Israel. This was the day before she arrived in town, and Israel immediately retaliates. And so the war has broken out, and she's giving her talk while the war is going on in real time. I want to show you a clip from it. It's very short, about a minute and a half, And you can see how this is weighing on her. She has friends and family back in Israel. And this is what she says. This was her talk at the Jack Miller Auditorium, and it was recorded on October 10th.
Now living in, again, a terrible time in a sense that, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I'm going to talk to you about killing and murder and destruction of children 80 years ago. Well, look what happens today. I didn't sleep a whole night, by the way, because I just kept thinking of the hundreds of civilians on both sides, on the Israeli side and on the Gaza side. The simple people had nothing to do with the war. It's the politicians. And how did it all start? Hatred. Hatred is what causing babies to die. Babies today, yesterday, I mean, I can talk about what happened 80 years ago, and I will, but babies have been torn away from their parents and with their parents and taken to places. And I just spoke to somebody this morning, and they said they don't know what this person is, they don't know what that person is. And then I watched, you know, the CNN, and I saw the buildings falling, and a man about my age says, I don't know where to go. I don't have a house. I don't know where my family is. And that only happened an hour ago. So things haven't changed.
So things haven't changed. Santiana put it another way: if we forget history, we're condemned to repeat it. What strikes me is what Tova says about the politicians. And she's talking about the leaders on both sides, Netanyahu on the Israeli side, Hamas on the Palestinian side. They're so determined to wipe each other out that it's the innocent people, the children, the babies who suffer and die as a result. I mean, it's insane. Both sides, she says, the politicians on both sides are the ones at fault. And remember, this is a Jew, a Holocaust survivor, who's telling us this. Well, a few days after Tova gave her talk, we had another visitor, or Hope College did, Mark Braverman, who heads the Kairos organization that advocates for Palestinian rights. Mark is Jewish also, grew up in an Orthodox home in Pittsburgh, wrote this book called Fatal Embrace, Christians, Jews, and the Search for Peace in the Holy Land. I think some of you were at his talk at Hope College. The point he makes 2 points actually. He talks about how our Judeo-Christian heritage plays into our support of Israel to the point where we have become blind to the plight of the Palestinians. He also makes the point, and Iona echoes this in their mission statement, that to be pro-Palestinian is not to be anti-Semitic. Don't equate the two. Look at both sides. Read the history of both sides. I can't emphasize that enough. Read history. Try to understand what led up to this conflict in the first place. Then maybe, just maybe, we can sit down and talk and let the healing begin. That would be the Iona way. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here this morning. I think you can see how the Iona experience did transform each of us in different ways and in very meaningful ways as we go forward into living into our spiritual commitments. Please follow Carrie out the door. She will lead the parade to go see the painting on the way to the sanctuary. And thank you all. And David.
Before you go, just a few notes to close. One, I want you to return next week for the St. Nicholas breakfast. Second, I want to say thank you very much to Dee Dee, who I should have introduced as my, not only a Hope Church member, but my recently retired communications colleague, where she was department chair, faculty moderator, founder of a number of diversity initiatives, leader of intergroup and intercultural communication workshops on campus. Just an incredible person. Adrian Johnson, recent Hope alum, fellow staff colleague working with audio, has helped us out this morning. Thank you, Adrian. I have to say, with regard to Cindy's comment at the beginning about the hearing loop experience, that was the first place I experienced, with the push of a button, going from not understanding a word to having my hearing aid serve as customized in-the-ear speakers delivering crystal clear sound. I thought, come on, guys, we got to have this here in the United States, too. And bottom line is, virtually every worship place and auditorium in this community is looped, as are more than 5,000 places across the United States now, from Broadway theaters and the Supreme Court chambers to the BART trains of San Francisco. So that's an Iona influence on the United States. And finally, this is Pizza Sunday. So Bruce wants me to remind you, want to say a word about that?
Thank you, David. Good morning. It's Pizza Sunday. And in the spirit of many hands, if some of you can spare a few moments, set up the tables and chairs. We'll be ready for pizza after the service. Appreciate it.